Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was southbound on US Route 191 in Arizona when the truck started to cough. The check engine light had been on since Holbrook, and the transmission had been hunting gears on every incline, but the final push came after a long climb that ended in a hard crosswind and blowing dust. I dropped into neutral, coasted, and watched the tack fall. The engine died without a dramatic statement. No smoke, no bang. Just silence and the sound of tires whispering over faded asphalt. I let gravity take me off the shoulder and down a cracked access road lined with scrub and low fences. The sign at the start of the road had been shot full of holes and painted over with a flat tan that almost matched the dust. Behind it, someone had planted 3 mesquite trees and a wind-bent flagpole with no flag. The access road led to a cul-de-sac of white gravel and a low cinder block office with faded plastic letters that had once spelled a name. The letters were gone. Only the outlines remained in sun-bleached rectangles. There were 12 pull-through sites arranged in a U-shape, each with a concrete pad, a metal utility pedestal for power and water, and a picnic table anchored with chain. A single laundry building sat in the back corner, its swamp cooler tilted and dry. The whole place had the frozen look of a business that failed quietly before the world failed loudly. I coasted into site number 7 and stopped next to a fifth-wheel trailer with leveling jacks still down. There were lawn chairs under its awning and a newspaper dated March 14th of the year things began. On the picnic table, a propane camp stove held a pan crusted with the remnants of scrambled eggs that had dried into a brittle skin. Half-cooked, half-eaten, left in a hurry. Inside the trailer there were family photos stuck to a corkboard, a pair of reading glasses folded on a paperback, and a child's drawing of a lopsided coyote. In the fridge, a few sealed bottles of water sat next to a long-expired carton of milk. The air smelled like dust and plastic, no mildew, no rot. The desert preserved the scene the way it does everything that gets too dry to decay. I listened. The wind, the creak of an awning strap, my own breath, and something else. Soft and steady, almost not there. A hum. It wasn't power line buzz. It wasn't the rattling slap of a loose metal roof panel. It was deeper, like air going through a large duct or the resonance you feel near heavy rotating machinery. It came and went in a slow cycle, louder for a few seconds, then fading, then coming back. It was most noticeable when I stood near the laundry building. I pressed my ear to the door. The knob wouldn't turn. The windows were covered with reflective film, and when I cupped my hands against the glass I could only make out a dark interior and a line of light that sketched the outline of a door inside the building. That was odd. A door inside a one-room laundry? I went back to my truck and set about triage. The battery was a recent Napa. Clean terminals. The fuel filter had been changed in Gallup. I cracked the Schrader valve on the rail and got a spurt, so the pump wasn't entirely dead. The problem was heat or sensors. I let the engine cool and checked the air filter. It was dusty, but not clogged. When I tried to start it again, it turned over slow and stopped. The hum at the back of the park rose a little and then settled. The desert sun slides from hot to harsh to dangerous without a visible change. I pulled a simple shade sail between my roof rack and the steel pedestal, then took stock. My name is Aaron Pike. Before the outbreak, I was a commercial HVAC technician based out of Flagstaff. That meant I spent years crawling into overheated rooftops and overcooled mechanical rooms, reading wiring diagrams, swapping blower motors, and troubleshooting control boards. It also meant I carried a careful set of tools, a battery tester with a carbon pile, a multimeter, and a modest superstition that nothing is truly broken until you've tested it twice. I had a decent amount of food and water in the bed box, a 5-gallon NATO can of treated gasoline, a 10-pound propane cylinder, a folding solar suitcase that fed a Bluetti power station, a Coleman camp cot, and a Ruger carbine I'd owned since I was 18. My emergency radio was a compact GMRS handheld with a spare antenna taped to the side. I hadn't heard anything useful on it in 3 days. I cleared Site 7's pedestal of a few spider webs and opened the panel. Inside was a main breaker with a knife switch, a 30-amp RV receptacle, a 20-amp GFCI outlet, and a water spigot with a vacuum breaker. The breaker handle was zip-tied in the down position. The zip tie was the kind maintenance techs use when they want to keep tourists from flipping things out of sequence. I cut it, flipped the breaker up, and checked the GFCI with my outlet tester. No power. The water spigot gave a dry cough and then a trickle of silt. The park wasn't on the grid, and the well pump was off or dead. But the hum existed. It vibrated through my boots when I stood near the laundry building and faded when I walked away. I slept in the truck that first night. Doors locked, carbine on the passenger seat, windows cracked. I woke to the hum punctuating the quiet like a distant ship in a port I couldn't see. No wildlife moved through the park, not even insects tapping the glass. I thought of nights in other places when the infected had turned up on the edge of camp, how they moved with that off-timed gait, how they followed the scent and the sound of living people with a mechanical focus that didn't care about thorn bushes or fences. I thought about how this place felt like a gap in a storm. No footsteps in the dirt. No tracks at all, except my own. If they had ever come here, they had left no mark. In the morning, I made coffee on the propane stove and ate like someone with future calories reserved. I treated the park like a puzzle. The office had no front plate on the lock, and the deadbolt had been retracted with a flat screwdriver. Inside, dust lay on a counter with a ledger book, a modem with its power cord missing, and a metal cash box with $37 in small bills. The back hallway ended in 2 doors. One was a small supply closet with toilet paper and floor cleaner. The other had been freshly painted the same color as the wall. It had no knob, just a keyhole. When I rapped my knuckles on it, the wood was solid, and the hum came back through the floorboards. Stronger. The ledger had a column of check-ins that ended abruptly 2 years ago, with no checkouts. Several names repeated. Seasonal workers by the look of it, and then a week where every site had block written in the reservation field, and the nightly rate was set to $0. After that, nothing. At noon, a faded red pickup drifted down the access road like a tumbleweed. It stopped at the start of the park, reversed, and rolled back toward the highway. I waved from the office door. The truck paused, then eased forward and pulled into Site 11 at the far end. The driver was a woman in her 40s with fast eyes and sunburned hands. A teen sat in the passenger seat, alert and quiet. The woman's shirt had the maroon scrub-top color you see on clinic nurses. She cut the engine and stepped out with her hands loosely away from her sides. "We're not staying," she said. "Just looking for water." "We're dry," I said. "Power's off, but there's shade." She glanced at the laundry building like she heard something. "You hear that?" "Yeah." "You alone?" "For now," I said. "Aaron." "Maya," she said. "This is Rio." The teen nodded. We were out of St. John's, the clinic closed. The roads are bad with abandoned cars, so we cut south to avoid the main lanes. We've been sleeping in the truck under a tarp. It's quiet here. "It is," I said. "You're welcome to park on the far side. If anyone else shows up in a hurry, we'll want space." We did the cautious dance of introductions that became the standard. Arms visible, bags opened, movements announced. Maya had a first aid kit packed like someone who had used every item in it at least once. She carried a small revolver with 3 rounds she had been holding onto for weeks because she felt safer with them than without them. Rio had a slingshot and the confidence of a kid who had taught himself to hit bottle caps at 20 yards because he had nothing else to do. They had 6 gallons of water, 2 of which were known to be questionable because of where they'd scooped them from. They had a cooler with jerky, apples, and an opened bag of trail mix sealed tight with blue painter's tape. They stayed for an hour and then decided to stay for the night. I moved my truck to Site 6 and gave them space. When the sun went down, the hum rolled in again, louder, then softer, a cycle that continued until first light. Rio sat on the picnic table in the dark like kids do when they want to pretend they're on a different planet. He said, "It sounds like the wall heater in our old apartment when it kicked on at 3 in the morning." "Boiler pump," I said automatically. "You get a 90 hertz whine with a failing motor. This is lower than that." "Maybe it's a big old fridge," he said. Maya sipped water and watched the laundry building. "It's not coming from the office, it's over there." "I know," I said. "Think it's safe?" "I think it's indifferent," I said. "That's the safest thing I've come across lately." On day 3, I walked a wide circle outside the park. The circle showed me everything the park wasn't. There were no fresh vehicle tracks. Sagebrush and cholla grew under a chain-link fence behind the laundry building, and the fence line ended at a shallow wash filled with smooth stones and tumbleweed skeletons. A fat lizard sunned itself on a rock and did push-ups at me. The hum carried across the wash like it came from underground rather than inside a structure. I stood and listened until my ears adjusted, and then realized something else. The hum wasn't steady white noise. It had a pattern. 5 seconds loud, 7 seconds soft, then a longer quiet of about 15 seconds, then the cycle restarted. You could set a watch to it. Not natural. Not random. The water problem needed a solution if we were going to sit here long enough to learn anything about the hum. The spigots were dry, but the park had to have a well if it was this far from town. RV parks need water for dump stations and laundry. I followed the line of pedestals and utility boxes. At the end of the row, there was a locked steel cap in a concrete square with a rusted padlock. The words, "Wellhead, do not tamper," were stenciled in fading black. I could hear nothing under it. Next to it, a steel post held a small metal box with nothing inside. It had been a control box once, probably for the pump. The conduit ran underground toward the laundry building, not the office. That was backwards if you design for a normal park. You bring power from the office and branch out. Here, the source felt like it was the laundry building. I brought my tools, cut the lock off the well cap and lifted it. A gust of cool, damp air rose from below. The smell of groundwater, metallic and clean compared to surface water. 20 feet down, a submersible pump hung on a polyethylene drop pipe. A safety rope ran alongside it, anchored to a rusted eye bolt. The wiring was intact and disappeared into the same conduit I had traced earlier. I watched the pipe for 5 long minutes. No movement, no sound. Dry above the pump, wet below. "I can run that pump if I can get power," I told Maya that night. "From where?" she said. I nodded at the laundry building. "From wherever that hum is hiding." She looked at the building and tightened her grip on her mug. "You going to break in?" "Only if it keeps humming at me," I said. We ran a quiet camp. The rules were simple. No fixed lights at night, only red lens flashlights, no music, no cooking smells that carried on the wind. Trash burned in a small trench with a sheet of corrugated metal placed over the top to hide the plume. Urine went on rocks. Human scent on soil lingers longer. Solid waste was buried with lime from a sack I found in the office closet. We established a routine. Mornings for scouting and repair, midday for rest, afternoons for replenishment, and evenings for watch. I stacked a ring of road reflectors and solar garden lights I found in a maintenance tub. We did not turn them on. They were there for later, when we might need to mark a path without stumbling. On day 5, a motorhome showed up. It came down the access road slowly, tires crunching gravel that hadn't been moved in years. It was an older Class A with sun-faded stripes and a dented rear ladder. The driver parked just short of the entrance and waited. I stepped into view with my hands up. Maya did the same from the far side, the window cracked. "Name's Walt," the man said. He had white hair and a steady voice. "Retired lineman out of Safford. I was headed back to a friend's place and got nervous about the highway, saw your tracks. Thought I'd ask if you're keeping this place." "Not keeping," I said. "Resting. You're welcome if you can keep quiet and help with water. No loud generators at night." He smiled a little. "I prefer daytime for the loud work." Walt had the tools and the instincts of a person who had climbed poles in monsoon winds and snow squalls. He looked at the same things I looked at: where the conduits ran, how the service was wired, what the load might be if we brought anything to life. He walked around the laundry building and put his palm on the wall. "Feel that?" he said. "Bearing noise," I said. "Big fan, or generator under load," he said. "That," I said. We took half a day to inventory extensions cords, spare breakers, PVC fittings, clamps, and old front desk items. We found a ring of keys in a drawer under the ledger, each stamped with numbers that did not match any door in the office. One key was shorter than the rest and had a triangular head. Walt held it up and grunted. "Government cabinets," he said. "We used to need those for switching gear. You don't see them in mom-and-pop parks." We went to the laundry building. The door was a cheap residential slab with a deadbolt. Not the kind of thing that stops a crowbar if you're serious. I used the bar. The door frame splintered and the deadbolt popped. Inside it was cooler by 10 degrees. 4 washers, 4 dryers, all coin-op, all unplugged. A big swamp cooler stood dead in a window frame, dry cellulose pads brown with age. On the far wall, past the folding table and the plastic chair, was another door. This one was painted metal with a recessed handle, set flush with a wall that did not belong in a laundry. It had a keyway with a triangular symbol stamped into the faceplate. Walt held up his key. It fit. We exchanged a look, then he turned it. The door opened on a concrete stairwell descending into the earth. The air was cold and smelled like lubricants and dust control fluids, glycols and something else hard to describe. The scent of a room where paint never fully cured. The hum grew from background to foreground in a way you feel more than hear, like how your ribs notice a passing truck before your ears decide it's loud. We went down the steps with our flashlights held low. At the bottom was a second door with a magnetic lock and a red indicator light that was off. Walt tugged. It opened. The room beyond was a small serviced space with a metal grate floor and 2 aisles of equipment racks tied together with ladder tray. The racks were labeled with laminated cards that had government agency acronyms on them: USGS, USFS, A.T. Bureaucracies layered onto each other. On the far wall, a diesel generator sat on isolators, big enough to run a small facility, small enough to fit in this space. It had a muffler that ran into a baffled duct. The duct disappeared into the wall and then turned upward somewhere out of sight. A control panel glowed green. The hum came from beyond a second metal door labeled transmitter. The air through that door moved in pulses. A long cable harness ran from the transmitter room to a bundle that vanished deep into conduit. Someone had built a communications node under a laundry and covered it with washers and a folding table. someone who wanted people to ignore it. Walt checked the generator panel. "Auto start on load," he said. "Looks like it's tied to a battery bank." He pointed to a set of rack-mounted lithium battery modules stacked in a cabinet with a manufacturer's label I recognized from a rooftop data closet job I'd done years ago. Each module had a bar graph of blue LEDs showing charge, all full. I stared at the breaker panel. It had branches labeled LAU, well, PRK, and TX. The TX breaker had a caution tag that said, "Do not interrupt. Wildlife study in progress." The tag had a date that placed it before the outbreak by about 6 months. Another laminated sheet said schedule 2100-0500 pulse cycle, May 7th, 15. I recognized the numbers. We were hearing the pattern that notebook promised. "Wildlife study?" Maya said, reading over my shoulder. "Could be anything," Walt said. "Bats, migratory birds, even pronghorn crossings. Folks do strange stuff with sound and radio to track animals." I opened the well breaker, flipped it on, then shut it right back off. The generator's controller clicked as if ready to spin, but stayed quiet. Auto start logic waited for a specific load or a command. I looked up at the scarred ceiling where exhaust ductwork vanished. The hum from the transmitter room swelled through the wall, and I felt it in my sternum. Rio pressed his palm to the metal and grinned in a way only a kid would grin near heavy equipment. He mouthed, "Whoa," and removed his hand like the panel might bite. We did not touch the TX breaker that first day. We stood there and watched the blue LEDs on the battery modules and traced the cable routes. Then we closed the doors, backed up the stairs, and put the laundry folding table back in front like we had never been there. Outside, the desert was unchanged. Hard sun, long shadows, and a sky so clear you could pick out satellites after dusk. The hum kept time with its own schedule. At 9 in the evening, the pulse seemed to strengthen slightly. I checked the sheet again and noted the start time on the card matched what my watch said. I sat on my truck's tailgate and thought about noise and movement. The infected had not come here. They had not even passed through. In other places, they drifted along washes and road edges, moving toward water, scent, and sound. Could the hum be repelling them? It wasn't impossible. Animals avoid infrasound and certain radio frequencies that feel like pressure. People get headaches from HVAC-equipped resonance all the time. Infected were still human bodies driven by altered cues. Maybe this place was a dead zone for whatever their new brainstem fixated on. I told myself to treat that as an observation, not a truth. If you accepted unproven truths out here, you got reckless. We made a plan to bring the well online during the day when the transmitter was sleeping. If the battery modules had full charge, then the generator likely hadn't burned diesel for a long time. The sound schedule implied the system ran off batteries at night and recharged during off hours on a timer, or there was a solar field I hadn't seen that fed the battery directly. I checked for panels and found none. That meant the generator took care of charging, likely in short daytime cycles to keep noise away from night hours when sound travels farther. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like someone designed this to be unnoticed by anyone but a few scientists collecting data from far away. At 10 in the morning, Walt and I went back down and armed the well branch. The generator controller chirped, then fired. The room vibrated. The exhaust duct pulled hard, and the sound was the warm, familiar note of a diesel under a real load, not idling. The battery cabinet display blinked to show charge current. Upstairs, I opened a spigot at Site 4 and got a cough, a spit, and then a clear stream. I let it run until it turned cold. That was groundwater straight from the well. We filled every container we owned, then shut the spigot, went back down, and opened the pump relay again to top off the battery for the transmitter's nighttime cycle. I logged the times on the laminated sheet without thinking. Technicians build habits even when there's no one to check the notebook later. For the first time since I coasted in, I considered that the park could serve as a base for more than a night. It had water if we used the generator in short bursts. It had a built-in reason the infected might avoid it. The transmitter could be left alone to do whatever it did. The office had shade. The laundry could be turned into a general-purpose room. The empty trailers weren't grief traps if you told yourself they were evidence of a quick departure, not an ending. I set up a power and water schedule. We would run the generator for 1 hour at 10 in the morning with well on and PRK off, fill up our containers, then shut down. In the late afternoon, we'd run it for 30 minutes with PRK on so we could charge radios and power a single oscillating fan in the office, then shut down again and let the transmitter have the battery at night. That kept our noise in the daytime when heat warped sound and the horizon shimmered. We set a budget for all consumables. Propane went to cooking and small refrigeration. Gasoline was reserved for the truck if I got it running again, or for the portable generator only in an emergency. Batteries ran the rest. The next arrival came a week later. He announced himself on GMRS Channel 20 like a person who had read a pamphlet on emergency radio procedures and made corrections in the margins. "Is anyone on site? I'm coming from the south. If you can hear me, I'm approaching slowly." "This is Aaron at the park," I said. "We're quiet and armed. Pull into Site 1, keep your hands visible, and kill your engine." He did exactly that. He was in his 50s, tall, wearing a broad-brim hat and sunglasses that had seen more field days than he had fingers. A call sign patch on his bag read K7RHM. He saw me see it and lifted a radio like you'd introduce a dog. "Ruth," he said. "Ruth Martin. Used to teach high school physics in Thatcher, ham operator since I was 20. I'm looking for clean ground and clear air. Heard nothing but dead carriers and low battery tones for days." I introduced everyone. Ruth listened. She had that calm, efficient way of sorting information you sometimes see in good teachers and amateur radio net controllers. When I mentioned the hum, she wanted to know the frequency content and the total acoustic energy and whether it had a radio component. I admitted I didn't know the exact numbers, but the laminated card down below said wildlife study and the schedule matched what we heard. I told her my working theory. The hum might discourage the infected, either as an annoyance or because it interfered with whatever they're following. She didn't laugh. She nodded, like a person who writes down hypotheses and tests them without falling in love with them. We made an inventory of communication gear. Ruth had a Yaesu HF transceiver capable of long-distance contacts if she could get a dipole antenna up and away from the park. She also had a small spectrum analyzer that ran on internal batteries. She and Rio spent an afternoon on the roof of the laundry building with paracord and a handful of ceramic insulators, stringing a simple wire antenna between the laundry and a pole at the edge of the property. They tuned it by adjusting the length until the analyzer showed the resonance where Ruth wanted it. She ran a careful test on low power and listened. The bands were noisy with static and bursts of what sounded like distant power switching. Now and then a station called out in a language none of us spoke and then faded. The infected did not show. Coyotes skirted the property line at dusk and gave the place the kind of distance they give a ranch dog's territory. A dust devil crossed the entry road one afternoon and unraveled when it hit the open center of the park. The wind picked up and laid down as if the place had its own tiny weather. We began to believe that the transmitter, whatever it was doing, was acting like a fence. No one trusted beliefs for long. The desert teaches you to check every happy thought twice. We kept watch in rotating pairs. When we collected water, we did it fast and put the hose away. When we scouted, we never went alone, and we carried enough to walk home without the truck. We set trip lines of fishing line with small brass bells at ankle height on the desert side. The bells hung in brush so the wind would not move them easily. I spent afternoons under the truck, step by step. The fuel pump wasn't dead, but it wasn't right. Heat soak after long grade climbs can kill them. The spark looked good enough, but the coil wire had a crack that arced to the block when conditions were perfect for failure. I replaced it with one from a box of parts I'd kept for years and forgotten about. The engine started and ran long enough for me to say a small thank you to my superstition that nothing is truly broken until you've tested it twice. Then it died again. Bad crank position sensor, Walt said. Had one go like that on a fleet truck, heat shuts it down. He was right. We pulled it and found a hairline crack in the plastic body, invisible until you flexed it. We rummaged in the park's maintenance room and found nothing useful. My parts bins didn't carry a spare for that model. I wrote down the make and part number in my notebook and circled it. Find this. The first test of the transmitter theory came at 3 a.m. when a herd of infected drifted past on Route 191 like a migration. We heard them before we saw any shapes. The human mind knows the sound of many footfalls the way it knows the word fire. We went dark, went still, and went quiet. Walt slid under his motorhome with a radio earpiece and a pair of night vision monoculars he had inherited from a son who didn't come home from a fire assignment in a different disaster long before this one. Ruth stayed in the office with a view through a slot in the blinds. Maya and I took the south edge and crouched by the laundry, breathing through our noses and focusing on the hum. The pulse was steady. The shapes on the highway kept a distance from our turnoff like there was a fence there no one could see. They moved without a plan, swaying and clustering around clusters until they passed the access road. 2 of them turned their heads toward us and then snapped them back like they'd touched a hot pan. The herd continued north, then east, then was gone. We stayed still for another 20 minutes to flush the adrenaline. Then I exhaled hard and whispered, "We need to mark this down." Ruth was already writing. "Tonight's condition fits your hypothesis," she said. "Not proof, strong evidence." "Did you get anything on the analyzer?" I asked. "Very low audio spectrum energy peaks in the 15 to 20 hertz range," she said. "Also some harmonics. There's RF too, narrowband in the VLF range. I'll need to chart it, but the acoustic component alone could make a difference. Humans are sensitive to infrasound, even if we don't consciously hear it." "Would it push them away?" Maya asked, steady and practical. "I can't say what it does to the infected specifically," Ruth said, "but it can cause discomfort, disorientation, and anxiety in healthy people." "It made people leave the RV park before the outbreak," I said. "The ledger shows the entire site blocked out months before everything went bad." "Then this place was a cover," Walt said. "Make it look like a regular park. Run your experiment at night. Don't let anyone see the equipment. Keep it off the map." In the morning, we made a list. Lists keep you honest. The list began as water, power, fuel, medical, comms, food, and tools. It grew into security, sanitation, repairs, and outreach. We didn't want to become a settlement, but we knew we couldn't be hermits forever either. The highway was a vein. People would come because people always follow infrastructure. The best we could do was choose our terms. Outreach meant a notice. We painted it on a sheet of plywood in black spray paint from the maintenance closet. Water shade by day. Quiet camp by night, no lights after dark. GMR's CH20. At noon for check-in. We tied it to the shot-up sign at the start of the access road. The idea was to keep traffic predictable. If you create a schedule, you give strangers a way to approach without spooking your camp. For a few weeks, it worked. Travelers came by daylight, most of them in bad shape but still aware, looking for a rest where the risk felt lower than usual. We shared what we could and traded for things we needed. A man in a Subaru brought us a bag of parts and, by luck, a crank position sensor new in box for my engine. He had bought it before the outbreak to fix a car he never fixed. I installed it that afternoon, and the truck started like it had never been troubled. "We still drive like we can't trust it," I said. "Short trips only." The park's rhythm settled into something like a life. We rigged the office air conditioner to operate for 1 hour every other day so we could work on gear without cooking ourselves. We moved 2 of the washers out of the laundry and bolted a table to the floor for equipment. Ruth set up the analyzer permanently and began a log that correlated the hum's pulse with the hourly weather observations we took because it felt wrong not to take them. The battery modules stayed healthy when we followed the schedule. The generator got an oil change and a new filter from a box of spares in the back of the transmitter room. Whoever had operated this node had planned for unattended service for years. The trouble that came next came wearing clean clothes and good sunglasses. A convoy of 3 lifted pickups rolled off the highway and into the access road in the late afternoon heat. Each truck had a grill guard, an LED light bar, and a driver too young and too confident. 2 men rode in the back of the second truck with hunting rifles pointed muzzle down and dust in their teeth. The convoy stopped at the entrance. The leader stepped down. He had a bandana around his neck and a watch that still kept time. "We're pulling fuel," he said. "From where?" I asked. "From your generator," he said. "We heard it. We've been following the sound all week." "Generator only runs on schedule," I said. "It's off now. Battery runs the night equipment." "You got diesel," he said. "We got trucks. You got soft rules posted on a sign outside." "Water. Shade, quiet," I said. "You can have all 3 if you leave before dark." He looked at the laundry building. He had the look of a man who had pulled copper out of buildings since he was 19 and framed it as resourcefulness. He looked back at me and smiled, like he wanted to show he could be friendly if he got his way. "We're pulling fuel," he said again. Walt stood next to me and put his hands in his pockets. Maya and Ruth stood back near the office door. Rio sat in the shade of Site 12's picnic table and didn't move at all. He could be still in a way that fooled people into thinking he wasn't really there. "Generators behind a door you don't want to open," I said. "Not because of what's on the other side, because of what happens to you if you make me lock it again." The leader's smile thinned. His people shifted in the beds of the trucks. One reached down and patted the buttstock of his rifle like a dog. The light bar on the lead truck had a cracked lens. I saw details, because details tell you the kind of person you're dealing with. These were takers who prided themselves on being organized. They would test our fence. If we were weak, they would strip us and sell our gear to the next taker. If we were strong, they would act like neighbors until they were stronger. "Fuel's not yours," the leader said. "It's not yours either," I said. "It's for this equipment. That equipment keeps the infected away. That keeps the highway safer. If you take it, the infected will come back this way. They'll follow the shade and the scent. Then you'll have to fight them on your return trip with less fuel than you have now." He listened. He even nodded. He looked like a man who could do 2 lines of logic at once. One about immediate gain, one about long-term risk. He looked at the office, at the laundry, and at the well cap. Then he shook his head. "Open it," he said. They moved fast when he gave the order. The driver of the second truck jumped down with a tool bag. The two men in the bed stepped toward the laundry with purpose. That was the problem with talking to people like this. The talking was a prelude to the taking, not the pitch and the close. We had prepared for this. The door down to the equipment room had a magnetic lock. It had no juice unless the generator was running, but it had a manual bolt on our side that Walt had installed out of a slab of steel he cut from the base of a broken picnic grill. We could make the downstairs safe if we got behind the door in time. We moved like a team that had rehearsed movements with words and tape lines on the floor. "Ruth, off the breaker," I said. She was already moving. The well, park, and transmitter branches were off. The battery stayed connected to the transmitter. We had not touched TX since day one, and we weren't about to stop now. The hum continued at its daytime minimum, a kind of ghost of the night cycle. "Walt, bolt," I said. He grunted and put his shoulder into it. The metal bar slid into place with a dull kiss. "Maya, office," I said. She was ready with the emergency kit and the radio. She had the Red Cross tone in her head from years of practice. Calm, clear, direct. "Rio, roof," I said. He ran a ladder up the back of the office in sock feet, so he made no sound. He had a pair of binoculars with a ball head mount he clamped onto the roof rail. He could spot anyone circling the park quickly. I stood by the laundry door with my Ruger. Safety off, muzzle down, finger indexed well away. I had a Mossberg 500 too, but I left it inside. If this turned into shots fired, a slow gauge would be too loud, and we would lose our advantage. The Ruger had a can on it I had traded for in a different town from a man who had owned it legally once, and then realized that legal had stopped mattering. The Ruger is a simple tool that puts small rounds where you tell it to. "Back off," I said to the lead man. "We're not giving up the equipment. You can fill your coolers and take a nap under your trucks, then go. Or you can make a problem that will follow you for weeks." He tilted his head and gave me the kind of smile men in bars give when they've already decided to throw a punch. He nodded toward the laundry. The two men advanced and put a pry bar on the door frame. The bar squealed. The frame moved. Walt's bolt held. They looked at each other and nodded like men who pride themselves on leverage over endurance. One went to get a jack. "Last chance," I said. He ignored me. He waved a hand in an idle arc that said, "Work faster." I raised the Ruger. Sight picture stable. Breath slow. I aimed at the bed of the lead truck where the light bar sat. I fired once. The crack was a click compared to a big rifle. The bullet took the cracked lens and made it shatter in a quiet rain of plastic. Everyone froze. The leader's eyes found me like he'd just been told a joke he didn't understand. He saw the small rifle and decided it wasn't an answer to anything. "Cute," he said. Then a sound rolled over the highway that made everyone look east. It was the ragged, disorganized echo of infected voices. Not many. Enough. I looked at my watch. The hum was ramping. The schedule said night cycles increased slowly between 9 in the evening and midnight. It was earlier than that. We had shortened the daytime generator run to prepare for this confrontation. The battery had enough charge for the transmitter to begin a partial cycle early on a load-sensing algorithm I had not seen documented. Smart systems are lovely until you want them to be stupid. The infected were not close. They were in the low ground near a dry arroyo half a mile out. The hum rose. Everyone at the park felt it. The two men with the pry bar took their hands off the door and put their palms on their own chests like the sensation had surprised them. The leader closed his eyes briefly in irritation. He cupped his hands and shouted to his men on the road, "Load up, 20 minutes and we're gone." They weren't gone in 20 minutes. They were still arguing over whether to risk the jack on our door when the first infected turned up at the far edge of the access road and stopped like it had walked into a glass wall. It leaned forward, swayed, then stepped sideways like a magician had moved the stage under its feet. It turned its head toward us, opened its mouth, and made the low vocalization that comes before the loud one. Then it closed its mouth again and backed up. It pointed its body toward the highway and walked away, stiff and crab-like it could only obey something inside its skull. The leader watched that like a person watches a physics demo that unsettles them. He tugged at his collar, which had suddenly become too tight. "You see now," I said. "Take what you want from the trash cans. Fill your coolers. Then leave. If you try the door again after you've seen this, I'll assume you're willing to risk bringing the infected back in a herd, and we'll act on that assumption." He considered it. He looked at my small rifle and Walt's old eyes and Maya's calm stance and Ruth's unblinking face. He weighed the fuel in the tank he couldn't see against the fuel in the tanks of his trucks he could. He measured pride against risk. He stuck his chin forward like a man who still wanted to think he wasn't backing down, even as he backed down. "Fill the coolers," he said to his men. 10 minutes. They filled them. They took a bag of ice from the office freezer that I had been saving for a reward night, and didn't apologize. They left the way they came, slow at first, then accelerating like the wind at their backs had shifted in their favor. We watched the dust settle. We took a deep breath then, all at once. "We have to get better at deciding when to show the downstairs and when not to," Ruth said. "We didn't show it," I said. "I meant the existence of it," she said. "They already knew about it," Walt said. "They heard it. They would have heard it even if we never opened the laundry." "Then we need an alternative," Maya said. "If they come back with more men and bolt cutters, we need something to run if they force it off, a backup." "Acoustic source we can control," Ruth said. "Not the transmitter, something we can build, something we can move." "We can build a low-frequency emitter if we have a big subwoofer, a proper amplifier and a clean sine source," I said. "I can generate audio tones on a laptop. I have a modified car amp in the truck I used for testing ducks. We'd need a driver, a big one, or a few smaller ones in a box. We'd need power." Walt nodded. "We can put a second battery bank in the laundry room. Isolate it. Run the emitter on that if we have to. Charge it off the generator in the day. You know how to tune a box?" "I've tuned dozens," I said. "Not at that frequency in open air, but I can calculate a ported enclosure for sub-20 Hz. It'll be large. We can also use a tactile transducer bolted to the steel beams. Vibrations can carry." "Will it make us sick?" Maya asked. "We'll have to be careful," Ruth said, practical. "And we'll have to be honest about unknowns, but it's better than letting strangers do whatever they want with the equipment." The next week shifted into build mode. I went through the abandoned trailers and found 3 12-inch subwoofers in one, installed under a sofa by a previous owner. Another trailer had a box of car audio gear that included a 2-kilowatt Class D amplifier, a bag of capacitors, and a spool of heavy gauge wire. I salvaged half-inch MDF sheets from cabinet doors and glued and screwed together a large enclosure. I tuned it with a long port and enough internal bracing to keep the panel resonance out of the passband. Ruth built a tone generator in software and set it to sweep between 17 and 20 Hz at controlled amplitude on a cycle that matched the transmitter's pattern. Walt wired a separate breaker and ran conduit to isolate the system entirely. We bolted the enclosure to the laundry building's slab and tested it for 10 seconds at a time during the day while we stood outside with hearing protection and the analyzer running. It worked. The pressure was hard to describe because there's not much to hear, only a feeling behind the eyes. We ran it lightly and avoided the place during the test windows. Then we turned it off and stored it as a reserve. The transmitter remained primary. Nights were calmer after that for a while. We got a rhythm of travelers who accepted our rules and traded fair value. A woman named Carla came through with 2 goats and a child seat strapped to a garden cart. She left us a box of MRE heaters and a bag of coffee we savored in small cups for weeks. A man named Dion arrived with a pack of lithium cells harvested from abandoned scooters and left with a repaired solar lantern and a printed sheet of hydration recipes Maya had used with patients who couldn't keep water down when the heat was severe. We became a node in the invisible network of people who decided to live long enough to see something after this. We didn't forget what we'd seen. We made 2 improvements that changed everything for us. First, we surveyed the land and found the footings for an old microwave relay tower half a mile away, behind a low ridge. The tower itself was gone, cut down for scrap years ago, but the footings were still there, with a concrete equipment pad that had a channel conduit run toward our park. The transmitter below the laundry was probably part of that old line. If we built a small structure on those footings, we could place sensors there that would give us warning of anyone approaching from the highway, and we could move the backup emitter out there to get the pressure away from us if we had to use it. Second, we dug into the generator's fuel system. The day I traced that line, I found the bulk tank. It was a buried horizontal cylinder with a manway, a lock, and a placard that said, "Diesel. Die only." The gauge under the manway was analog and stiff with age, but it moved. It read between 1/4 and 1/2. I climbed down and listened with a stethoscope. The tone said liquid sloshing against a metal shell. Walt tapped the side with a wrench and listened for the ring. We nodded at each other like men whose trade allowed them to hear numbers and sound. "That's enough to run for months if we keep it light," I said. "It's enough to cause trouble if someone decides to pump it all into their trucks in one day," Walt said. We built a lock cage that hid the manway under a false rock panel made from fiberglass and resin we poured over chicken wire and desert dirt. We disguised the cage with cactus skeletons and a crate of empty bleach jugs that made it look like a place no one touched because it belonged to whichever maintenance guy had gone to lunch and never come back. We were as prepared as we could be when trouble came again. It came with less swagger and more numbers. The convoy returned, but this time they had a fuel trailer. A homemade job with a transferred axle and a welded frame. The kind of thing men build in driveways when they tell themselves they're starting a business. They came at noon, when our sign said we were on GMRS Channel 20. They called and said they wanted to discuss a trade. They had ammunition in calibers we did not use and cans of peaches we did. They had work gloves still in plastic. They wanted diesel. They didn't ask this time. They used the word allocation. We met them on the road outside the park in daylight, with no one behind us. They parked with their tails facing the highway the way experienced drivers park when they want to leave quickly if they have to. The leader stayed back. He had a new pair of sunglasses and a new scar under the old bandana. He had learned something since the last time we spoke, but I couldn't tell what. The man who did the talking was older. He had a farmer's tan and the kind of baseball cap that comes from feed stores. He introduced himself as Todd and asked the kind of questions mediators ask when they want everyone to feel heard. How many people? How much diesel do you have? If we paid in trade, what would you be able to spare without endangering yourselves? None, I said. That's not a number, he said. It's an answer, but not a number. It's both, Ruth said. If the equipment goes silent at night, infected traffic on this stretch of 191 will increase. That endangers everyone out past Alpine and Clifton and all the way to Interstate 10. If you have routes east, you will not have them long. It will not be better for you if you take any fuel at all. Todd listened. He truly did. He put his hands on his hips and looked at the ground while he thought the way men do when they know a thing is true, but also know they have promises to keep to people who expect them to bring home a tank full. He tried a different approach. "What if we help you run it?" he said. "We'll bring you oil filters. We'll send a man who can change belts and fix leaks. We'll leave 10 gallons for every 100 we take. That way, we all benefit." "You'll run it louder," Maya said. "More often. It's quiet now. We run short cycles in the day. If you operate it by your schedule, you'll be heard." "You don't get to tell us how to do our work," the leader said, stepping up like a shadow behind Todd's shoulder. "No one told you to stop," I said. "We're asking you to find a different solution. This one isn't yours." He smiled. "We'll see." That night, they came back, not by the road, but through the wash behind the laundry. They moved well for men with heavy boots and rifles. They had learned to avoid bells. They had learned to keep their voices low. They had not learned to be patient. One of them slipped on smooth stone, and the soft swearing that followed carried. We heard it from the office and moved the way we had practiced. The hum began its 9 in the evening increase. Walt hit the emergency switch on the transmitter rack that kept the battery engaged, even if the entrance breaker was flipped. Maya took the medical kit to the office bathroom where the sink was clean. Ruth pulled the panel on the backup emitter and checked the cable connections, because when you needed a thing that you built yourself, that's the moment the loose set screw will bite you. I went to the roof with Rio and watched the edge of the park through the slot of the vent cover. They approached the laundry's back wall. One put his ear against the cinder block and made a face that said he felt the pressure. They went to the door, stood inside its shadow, and looked for the bolt. Walt had built a cover plate and painted it to match. They didn't find it. They slid a pry bar into the jamb. The jamb flexed, the bolt held. They set a porta-powered jack from the fuel trailer under the handle. The plate creaked. "Ready?" I said to Ruth on the radio. "Ready," she said. "Cena at 18 hertz. Amp at 30%. That's our test limit. If you tell me to push, I'll push." "Push only if they open," I said, "and then only until they go away." "Copy," she said. They pumped the jack. The plate gave a tired groan. I watched the far edge of the access road. The infected did not show on the highway. They clustered in the low ground like they did last time, but they did not approach the park. The leader's voice floated up from the dark. "Faster," he said to a man I couldn't see. The man cursed in a whisper. The jack slipped. The plate sprang back to its original position with a slap. The man holding the pry bar pinched his hand and let out a breathy cry that he cut off with his teeth. "Now?" Ruth said in my ear. "Now," I said. The backup emitter came up like a slow wave. It was different from the transmitter's pulse. This was a tone that rose to amplitude and then swept half a hertz and then held. The effect was immediate. The men at the door leaned away from it like it had physical force. One dropped the pry bar. It clanged. That sound carried. The infected on the highway made their low pre-call again and then stopped. They milled, then drifted away. "Shut it down," I said to Ruth. "Dropping," she said. We let the night air pump through the park for a minute while our hearts settled. The men at the door retreated to the wash and had a heated whisper argument we couldn't follow. Then they went away. We stayed awake until dawn and drank coffee at sunrise like people who had seen a line not break. It wasn't victory. It was a postponement. We had a clear new problem. We were important to people who wanted what we had. We were a node that created value. That made us a commodity, whether we liked it or not. We could either hide or declare. Hiding hadn't worked. The hum gave us away. We decided to declare on our terms. We sat down at the picnic table, wrote a speech none of us intended to deliver, then shortened it to a single paragraph we would say to the next convoy, and the next, and the next. "This is a study site," I would say. "It produces an effect that keeps infected away from this road. That effect helps everyone. We run the site on a strict schedule and will not change it. We do not trade diesel. We do trade in information, basic medical supplies, and water. If you want to help, bring oil filters and belts. Bring bandages and peroxide. Bring radios that can be set to transmit on a shared channel and will be left here. Bring a booster pump and a pressure tank kit if you have one, so we can wash clothes without running the generator long. Bring tools. Take shade and leave quietly. The first time I said it was a day later. A man with a face like dried river clay and a hat with a straw brim drove in with one hand on the wheel of an old Ford tractor. He said he had a farm out towards Bonita and needed to move a pump. He wanted a place to rest before he hooked up to a water tank. He listened to my speech and nodded. "You're the reason the road is clear," he said. I wondered. "Maybe," I said. "If you need belts, I know a place," he said. "Old County Yard, they had a wall of them." He left with a full canteen and came back the next day with a crate of belts. He took a small lunch, drank water, and kept going. The day after that, he came through again and honked his tractor's horn twice in a way that made everyone smile, even though we're not the kind of people who smile at horns anymore. Tiny connections matter when most of the big ones are broken. We refined our perimeter. We moved the backup emitter to the old tower footings and set it in a small block building we built from salvaged cinder blocks and rebar, then plastered with mud and straw to make it blend into the terrain. We put the tone generator on a remote switch I can operate from my truck radio by keying a sequence. We powered it from a second battery bank that we charged with a portable gasoline generator I ran in a pit with baffles so the sound didn't carry. We ran the gasoline generator at midday during a 1-hour window when the highway shimmered and the sound got lost in the heat. We wrote down everything and taped the sheets to the office wall. I drew schematics in pencil. The generator control panel, the battery bank, the 3 breaker branches, the backup emitter wiring. I wrote out the maintenance schedule for oil changes and filter swaps. I made a list of part numbers for belts, hoses, and fuses. I trained Walt on the transmitter room sequence so he could run it if I was gone. Ruth trained Rio on the radio nets. Maya trained us all on wound care and heat stroke signs, and what to do if anyone developed a cough that wouldn't go away. We taught each other everything we knew because knowledge is fragile when it lives in one head. Summer turned into the kind of fall only the desert understands. The difference is in the mornings and in the angle of the sun. We took advantage of the cooler air to cut fire breaks around the park and set up a ring of simple sprinklers driven by a small pressure pump we took off a dead RV. If wildfire came, we wouldn't stop it, but we wouldn't make it easy to take the park whole. Walt found a rusted shipping container on a ranch track and dragged it to the property line with a chain and the motorhome. We used it as a shield to block line of sight to the laundry from the highway. It didn't make the hum quieter. It made prying eyes less efficient. One day, a woman with a crew cut and a firefighter's stance came in with a clipboard and a radio clipped to a vest. She had a patch that said District 3 and a name tape that said M. Lee. Her pickup had county plates that someone had painted over to make them less conspicuous. "I heard a rumor," she said. "A road that's safe at night. Wanted to see." "You found it," I said. "We don't promise safe. We've seen things ignore promises." "I know about that," she said. She introduced herself as Michelle. She had been a district ranger in a national forest office before the funding ended and the phones died. She was the first person who had official standing in the before times and still carried herself like that mattered in the after times without making you want to punch them. She walked the park with us. She asked questions about the equipment the way a person who has once signed for a thing asks questions. She took notes. When we showed her the transmitter room, she went quiet. She read the card on the wall and the laminated warning and the schedule. "This is bigger than a wildlife study," she said. "How big?" Ruth asked. "I don't know," Michelle said, "but it's a node. I saw a map like this at a cooperator meeting with USGS before the outbreak. It showed locations where acoustic and ground movement sensors were being tested for early earthquake detection across the Southwest. Not here. Elsewhere. Maybe they piggybacked systems. Maybe this was an acoustic fence for highways at night to reduce wildlife collisions, and they layered other studies on top. Or maybe something else. What matters is that it works for us now. "Will more people come if they find out?" Maya asked. "Yes," Michelle said. "That's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to set rules and stick to them. Rules are not oppression. They're survival." Michelle stayed the night and woke at 2 in the morning when the hum hit a deep note and the dust outside moved in a way that doesn't require a wind to move dust. She sat in the office doorway with me and drank water from a cup and told me about the last meeting she attended before everything collapsed. It had been about resource allocation, wildfire staffing, and bridge maintenance schedules. All of it important, none of it ready for a world where plans didn't matter. She shook her head at the memory and said she remembered wanting to argue about a small line item, then thinking better of it because the chair had a way of shutting down conversation, so they made their time limit. Then the phone rang and the meeting ended, and she never saw those people again. "We could put this back on the map," she said. "Should we?" I asked. "If you take in the people who can contribute," she said. "If you set rules and enforce them. If you stay small enough to decide quickly and large enough to defend yourselves." We talked for a long time that night. Ruth joined us and argued for communication protocols. Walt came in, belly full of coffee, and argued for a settlement that doesn't outgrow its water. Maya argued for a first aid station with strict admission rules. We treat what we can, we refer what we can't, and we do not let our compassion run us out of gauze. Rio argued for a place kids could sit on a roof and see the horizon without thinking something was going to come over it. He didn't say it. He sat there and looked happy, which said it. In the morning, we painted a new sign. Same board, new words. This park is active. Day, water, shade, quiet work. Night, no lights, no generators, no exceptions. Do not approach the laundry building. GMRs, CH20. Check in at noon and 5 p.m. If you can read, you can follow instructions. We didn't expect the last line to help. We wrote it for ourselves as a joke and left it on anyway. It made us smile. Smiles are rations. The months that followed put stress on every line we'd drawn. A woman arrived who had been bitten on the hand in a scuffle with a person who did not want to be called infected. The wound was deep, but not catastrophic. Maya cleaned it, irrigated it, and bandaged it. She watched for fever, for changes in behavior, for anything that matched the list we all carried in our heads that none of us wanted to write down. The woman recovered. She cried when she realized she wasn't going to change. She left the next day with a pair of leather gloves and a bag of rice. A man arrived with a cough that sounded like broken glass in a cup and a fever that wet his hair with sweat in the morning cool. We set him in the office with the fan on him and gave him fluids. He died that night, quiet and still. We buried him outside the fence under a mesquite and wrote down the GPS coordinate because families deserve information even when they don't deserve the world that made them ask for it in that form. We used the same words we used for everyone. We are sorry. We tried. The convoy came back one more time. This time they sent a woman. She had a way of standing that said she had been asked to make peace between men who didn't understand why anyone needed to make peace. She offered a real trade, belts and filters for water and medical supplies. She also offered information. There were new roadblocks to the south set up by a group with badges and checklists who wanted to reopen a way station for reasons no one could explain. We traded in daylight, in a measured way, and wrote down what we gave and what we got. We added her to the noon radio checknet. She checked in twice and then stopped. We wrote her name on the whiteboard and left it there without erasing it for a week longer than we usually leave names, because people deserve a week longer if they brought belts and didn't shout. One night, lightning started a fire 5 miles out. We saw it from the office as a glow behind the ridge. The hum was steady. The wind was not. It pushed ash toward us for 20 minutes, then changed and dragged smoke back toward the ignition. We ran the sprinklers and wet the perimeter and packed go bags we hadn't unpacked in months. We chose which items would go in the truck if we had to abandon the park in 10 minutes. We chose the same as everyone in our position chooses: the bag of papers that mean less than we want them to, the photos on thin memory cards, the radio gear, the first aid kit, the scarves we've slept with through hot nights because they smell like something we can't name. The fire bent away. We stood down. We didn't try to make meaning out of that. We just slept a little deeper for one night and were grateful for one morning. The mystery of the park's past did not solve itself. We didn't find a file folder labeled cover story or a binder with a signature that explained why a transmitter sits under a laundry in a forgotten RV park near a highway that carries fewer cars than it once did. Every now and then, very late at night, a sequence of tones would ride our long wire antenna, and Jake break into the spectrum analyzer in a way that made us think someone was still out there, somewhere, running code in the dark. Ruth would record it and play it back at quarter speed and smile without joy. "Someone is still listening," she would say. Or someone left a do-while loop in a building like ours and it's still sending keep-alives to a receiver that burned down. Sometimes the best you get is that: a waveform and a shrug. The infected continued to avoid us. They moved along the highway in the distance, then slid away. Invisible fences drawn by hum and night, and the choices we made with our hands on switches. Not every night, not perfectly. One night, a small group wandered close to the access road and stood at the sign long enough to make my throat tighten. The hum pulsed. They tilted their heads as if they'd all heard a note at the same time. They retreated slowly and continued north without looking back. We stayed still and quiet and counted. 4 shapes went by. 5, 8, 9. We watched until the horizon swallowed them and the hum went back to its soft cycle, and the crickets we never hear here didn't start up because there are no crickets to start up. We talk sometimes about leaving. The truck runs. The road is open in both directions most days. There are mesa tops with better views and caverns with better roofing. There are towns with hydro plants still trickling power like old men lifting bottles. There are valleys with soil and water and a chance to plant. We talk about it. Then we look at the sign and the laundry and the backed-up bolt and the notebook on the table that has months of maintenance logs I wrote in pencil that's smudged on the edges. We look at the faces of the few travelers who stop and drink water and eat a sandwich and sit in the shade for 20 minutes without thinking about whether something will come and take it from them in those 20 minutes. We watch their shoulders go from up by their ears to where they belong. We look at each other and don't say anything, because we already know this is where we're useful. I tell myself I'll leave when the hum stops. If it does, if the batteries finally die and the belts disintegrate and the generator throws a rod, and the transmit transformer arcs out and paints a carbon track on a piece of equipment we cannot replace. I'll leave then, because staying would be a fantasy. Or maybe I won't, because by then we'll have built something else in its place and written another card and taped it to the wall. Maybe we'll have a wind turbine blade spinning on a mast we welded out of fence posts. Maybe we'll have a mechanical siren rebuilt from an old plant whistle that operates on a hand crank and a cable that runs the length of the park. Maybe we'll have a dozen kids who grew up never hearing crickets who think the hum is what the night sounds like when you're safe. A week ago, I stood by the laundry at dawn with a cup of coffee and listened to the last cycle fade. The light hit the cinder block and turned it the color of old bones. A hawk flew low, silent. A sedan came down the access road with a family tucked inside, parents in front, a grandparent in the back, a little girl peeking over the door card with her chin. The father rolled down the window and said, "Is this a good place to stop? We saw your sign." "It is," I said. "Come park in the shade, we'll get you water." He pulled into Site 5. He did it neatly, like a man who used to back trailers into dumpsters for a living and could feel the arc through his hands. The little girl got out, looked at the laundry building and pointed. "What's that?" she asked. "A room," I said, "where we keep the night on a schedule." She nodded, like that made sense. Then she shook a bottle at me and said, "We have this. It's empty." "We have full ones," I said. "Do you have a marker?" she asked. "We have a few," I said. She took the marker and drew a smiley face on the empty bottle and handed it back like we hadn't given her anything yet and she wanted to balance it out. Then she went to the picnic table and swung her legs. The grandparents eased their backs and smiled at each other in a way that said everything they needed to say. I carried the empty bottle to the spigot and opened the valve. The water came out steady and clear, and I watched for the moment when it ran cold. I waited for the small shiver in the pipe that tells you the pressure tank is filled and the pump is not working hard. I closed the valve and handed the bottle back, full. The girl held it with both hands and looked like she had been trusted with an egg. Her father took it and passed me a short roll of black tape without comment. Good tape, real tape, not the kind that gives up when it touches heat. He didn't say where he got it. He didn't have to. He had paid with something he valued and we needed. That night, we walked our rounds. We checked the boilerplate on the generator, the temperature in the battery bank, and the trip lines on the perimeter. We took the radio report at 5 in the evening. We ran the 1-hour charge cycle at 10 in the morning. We checked the signs for bullet holes and none were new. We slept in shifts. I am still here. The park was used for something else before any of us arrived. The humming had been here long before the infected turned nights into something to survive. I don't know if the frequency was chosen for pronghorn or for trucks, or to make night driving safer without telling anyone a transmitter was the reason they felt better on this stretch of road than they did on the next. I don't know if it's part of a larger network still out there, running, humming, pushing things in the dark in tiny, consistent ways. I do know this. At night, when the pulse follows its schedule and the highway shimmers with heat left over from the day and then goes cool and quiet, the infected do not come here. They do not cross the access road. They do not step into the park and circle the laundry building and bang their hands on the door. Maybe someday they will, and the hum will fail, and the night will be just night again. Until then, this is where we hold the line by holding a schedule. This is where we fix small machines with smaller parts and keep notes in pencil and flip breakers in a sequence written in block letters. This is where a forgotten RV park that doesn't appear on any map, except the one in the mind of a trucker who traded a crank sensor for a hot shower, has become a place worth stopping at for an hour that might save you a day. If you see our sign, pull in by daylight. If you have belts, bring them. If you have water, we'll refill your bottles. If you have the patience to follow instructions, you will rest without worry for a little while. If you are one of the infected, you will keep walking, because something in the air will tell you that this is not your place, that there are other places to go, and you will go there without knowing why. And if you hear a hum at night that rises and falls in a pattern, count with me. 5, 7, 15. The night is on schedule. We're still here. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.